everybody. Welcome to another episode of CRESI's Ontario Landlord Series. Today, we're going to be talking to people that are looking to make and create a basement apartment. With all the different municipalities wanting more densification, the different families out there that are looking for mortgage supplementation and a little bit of help with some rental income coming from the basement, or the larger families that would just like to have that nanny suite so they can have their mother-in-law have their own separate unit and still be so close to home as the aging years are coming with all these baby boomers out there. A legal basement apartment is an essential addition, right, to many of our homes out there in Ontario, um, offering an opportunity, like I was saying, for rental income and just extra living space. But what we need to understand and what we need to avoid are the fines and understanding the safety risks. Homeowners need to ensure that their basement apartments are meeting the necessary legal requirements when doing so. In Ontario, there are specific building codes, zoning laws, fire safety regulations that we must follow when we are creating a legal basement apartment. Um, Today, we're going to be talking to Mr. Rob Di Lisi from Stonegate Legal Services as we are going to discuss the legal side of what needs to be done when you're creating a legal basement apartment so you can go out there and you can rent it out to somebody else. We're going to get into building codes, insurance issues, and that in other episodes. So for this one here, we're going to just strictly talk about the legal ramifications. So Rob Di Lisi from Stonegate Legal Services, how are you? Thanks for joining us again, my friend.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me on again. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It seems to be a very hot topic these days, so I'm glad that you're doing this.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that we get asked a lot more questions about, right? How can we build a legal basement apartment? Do we have to make it legal? Are questions I get all the time. I'll let you start out. And why don't we just say how you think about legal basement apartments from your end, and we'll get into some conversation
Yes,
as we go.
le- legal basements are wonderful. The key is legal basement. The one thing that I see a lot is that people do put people in their basements, whether legal or not. And if they're illegal, the city will eventually come to them and say it must be legal. In regards to the Residential Tenancies Act, whether you have a legal basement or not, that has nothing to do with the RTA. So just to be clear, RTA is for your residential tenancy. If the unit is illegal, such as the doors, the entrances, the windows, all the fire rated stuff that the fire department likes, that has nothing to do with RTA. So we get sometimes landlords calling us saying the city now wants me to either make it legal or remove the tenant so that it's now just a single family dwelling. Well, here's the problem. You do have a legal tenancy. So if you have a legal tenancy, you can't just tell the tenant, I need you to move out. There is no notice that says, I need you to move out. So the only other option would be is considering the settlement option, which we've discussed before is a cash for keys option. Okay. So that's legalities on that.
Yeah, because it would be the city telling you that you need to remove the tenant, right? Because of a bylaw situation, not anything to do with the RTA, as you're saying. So you would have to
Correct.
get the tenant out by negotiation, and then that cash for keys, right, with the mutual agreement is the only way that we know to do something like that. Um, so there was my first question I was going to say that I get told all the time: Can I rent out my basement without legalizing it? Because there are many that are illegal basements out there that people are living in right now, and until one of their neighbors or somebody says anything, or the city finds out because of something, most times they find out
Usually it's the tenant, by the way.
the tenant
Usually it's the tenant. Yeah,
when they have an argument probably, right? And they are saying, "Hey,
that's
listen,
correct.
I'm living
That's
here and
correct.
now you gotta fix it." What happens when we don't meet those legal requirements, right? And really it is, fines from the city, right? And having to remove the tenant and then having to correct it if they want to then turn around and rent it out. Anything else that you'd bring there?
Yeah, so I can't get into the legalities of like what the bylaws are because don't get involved in that. All that I can tell you is that, in my personal opinion, if you are going to rent out your basement apartment, it should be legal. It will be a benefit to when you want to sell it because now you can call it a legal basement apartment. Some of the costs could be, and I say could be tax deductible, so that's something that you can check with an accountant. There's a lot of pluses The thing is that it should be done properly before the tenant moves in, because once the tenant moves in, to do this afterwards is going to be a little difficult.
Definitely, especially with fireproofing and everything like that, right? When you're thinking about drywall, or if it's a window that
Right.
needs to be a certain size. And you're right. It's definitely worth legalizing the basement apartment, right? When I'm talking to people about it, and they're saying, well, I got to get costs and permits and all these things that are going to add on to this. Well, it's also going to, like you said, increase your property value, right? You're going to be able to then probably obtain a little bit more rental income because it's legal. It's going to be a nicer apartment, right? When you think about things like daylight coming in and stuff like that. And then the same
Right.
thing for the landlord, you're going to have that peace of mind knowing that everything is done right. Nothing's going to happen. The tenant can't complain. And perhaps if they have a fire in the basement, that it's not going to affect your unit, or
Right.
not badly.
Now, Kevin, with your permission, I actually wrote a few points that people should be aware of. So, first things first, whether this is a family friend, family, relative, you should always, always, always have a lease, something in writing. Okay. That's very, very important. The second thing is that this is all landlords, is you should understand the Residential Tenancies Act and understand the key responsibilities of the landlord. And I'll just give you a few examples. So, repairs and maintenance, that would be section 20. Vital services, you cannot cut off your heat, hydro, or water. Privacy and entry, 24 hours is required except for emergencies. And another thing that I see a lot is changing the locks. So, if they're changed, the tenant must receive a key as soon as possible. Then there's preparing and leasing your property. Remember that if this is not a family member or a close friend, first impressions do matter. So make sure it's clean, well maintained. Do all the things that need to be done before the tenant moves in. Next would be set a competitive, realistic price. That's another thing that I see that a lot of landlords do. Finding qualifying tenants. So use credit checks, employment verification, rental history, stuff like that. In regards to the lease signing, remember the Ontario standard lease is the lease. Remember, you can only collect first and last month's rent plus a key deposit, but the key deposit should be the cost of the key. Now, let's talk about managing tenants and common issues. Personally, what I do for my properties is that I have a move in inspection. So I document everything that's wrong with the property. Understand that if they do not pay rent, you need to be able to give them the notice for non payment of rent. If you're going to be selling or moving into the property, and especially on a basement apartment, you need to understand the N12. So make sure you understand the N12 for either personal use or a buyer's use. Remember that repairs and maintenance is the responsibility of the landlord, and you should respond immediately and efficiently. So you should have a work order system in place so that when you're notified, you can get on it. And the last point I'm going to make is remember to run this like a business. I don't care if you're a friend, your cousin, your father, your mother, well, maybe not father, mother, but make sure you treat it like a business. That means screening the tenants properly, using the legal forms, understanding the RTA, avoid the costly mistakes that most landlords make, and use professionals, whether it's your realtor, property manager, paralegal, whatever the case is. All right. So those are the points that I wrote down, and I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we're gonna go through a few of those just to kind of hit right now. Again, you mentioned use a lease, right? Because that's something that people think, well, they're in my basement, isn't it a part of my house? It's not the same when I'm living upstairs versus living off site, right? There's one for you. I'll let you hit that. It's the same, right?
Yeah, so if it's a separate dwelling, then it's a separate unit. The only time that you don't have to worry, well, you should worry anyways, is if you're sharing kitchen or bathroom and you're just renting out a room, then the RTA does not apply. But you should still have a roommate agreement. Putting things in writing are very important because if you ever call the police don't get involved in residential tenancy matters. However, if you show that it is a roommate agreement, they are there to keep the peace. All right. And depending on where you are in the city, some police do get involved. They're supposed to when it doesn't apply to the RTA, but some police just don't want to get involved because they don't want to risk getting in trouble. Because now a lot of the police officers have body cameras.
Yeah. So there you go. The lease, sorry, a basement apartment is like a complete separate dwelling where the RTA is in full effect. So once they're in, they're in. I've heard of people like you mentioned moving in family members all the time, and then a few years later, life changes, something happens, and now they're in an argument, and now they don't want them living there, but they are there because they're a tenant, and even though they were family, cousins, whatever, friends, it doesn't matter. They are a tenant. They have all the rights that the RTA is there for them. Um, so let's talk about the upstairs and downstairs being there. They're in a basement apartment. It's a separate dwelling, but they're shared utilities. They don't have the separate metering for everything. So a lot of people will do it on a percentage or anything like that. But what happens if somebody stops paying or something? That basement stops paying those utilities, as you mentioned, you can't shut it off. Um, how would they sort through those types of things?
So it's very important that you put it in the lease what the utility arrangement is. And when you get the bill, you must give a copy of the bill to the tenant. In the event they don't pay, you can give them a notice, which is called an N5 for the utilities. But remember, it's very important that you are sending them a copy of that bill because you can't just say to them, okay, I got the bill, give me X amount of dollars without looking at the bill. Another thing to be concerned about with basement apartments, I'm just going to say let's say it's a single male moving that lives downstairs. That single male is allowed to have roommates, occupants, or guests without the landlord's permission. So that means that that could affect the utilities.
No, and yeah, so they can move in a girlfriend, they could then get a dog, right? All these things that the single guy never had, and the landlord upstairs or the landlord offsite, whatever it may be, can't do anything about it. These are their rights. They're allowed to do so.
Also, if I may, Kevin, if you are looking for a basement tenant, remember the human rights still applies. So you can't discriminate on color, creed, uh, gender, whether they're gay, not gay, black, white. It doesn't matter. So you have to be very careful because that's another thing that we see a lot where people say, I only want white male or I only want Indian female or whatever the case may be. So make sure you understand you cannot discriminate.
I never would allow anybody to myself, but it is again, you're right. That is something that I heard. That people are for whatever reason more comfortable sometimes with one thing or the next, and that's just how they would like to choose it. But we just have to say we're looking for a really good qualified tenant that's going to enjoy this space and be great for you to work with, and that's who we're going to find. As I mentioned at the top here, we are going to talk about basement apartments from all different types of angles, and we're going to do this as well with an insurance broker so we can get into all that as well. And we're going to talk with a mortgage consultant to make sure that you're understanding all the different angles from professionals as we talk about basement apartments, because this is a great way to bring in some supplemental income to everybody as families are looking to move up. Real estate is getting more expensive, costs and everything are there. So, this is a great way for people that don't need that additional space in the basement to help supplement their mortgage or increase everything as well. And like I said, moving in that family member, even if you're just moving in the family member, you should still do it as a legalized basement, even though you might think it's just okay, not because it's a family member, but eventually, as Rob mentioned earlier, the value will increase when you go to sell the home, and it just um, peace of mind and everything should always be done properly. I truly believe that. Anyways, I think that's going to wrap it up for today, Rob. Unless you want to touch on anything else.
No, I think we covered everything. So that's great.
Awesome. Thanks as always for listening. I hope you guys got something out of this, and we'll be back some more to talk about basement apartments. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Please remember, while we are professionals, this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The advice shared may not apply to your unique situation. Always seek personalized advice from a qualified professional before making any investment decisions.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're finding it informative and useful, make sure to like, subscribe, share with a friend so that we can keep getting the information out there to Ontario landlords. And keep on joining us. We'll see you next time.